So I did just a few words about who I am in case you don't know. I'll talk more about what we're doing today when we actually, after sending prayer, after we actually get started. So how many of you were here last year? All right, so we have a good number. You're not sure.
That's good.
I don't know. We never know if we're actually here. Usually we're not. But before we go, just a few words. I was raised on Long Island, not far from here on the Valley Stream, and went to Jesuit High School, Regis in Manhattan, and entered the Jesuits when I was 17, and went through Fordham as a Jesuit. But when I graduated, I entered the Carthusian order, which is a hermit order founded in the 11th century by St. Bruno. It wasn't actually founded as an order, but it started then. And spent 12 years with them, during which time I was ordained in Vermont. When I was there, 12 years in Vermont, the American House. Then I was 7 years in France at the main house, the Grand Chartreuse, subject to the documentary Into Great Silence, as some of you may have seen. Where I was also in charge of making the liqueur. So if you have any questions about the liqueur, I won't answer them. Well, I can answer some of them. And then 3 years in England, and then after 22 years as a Carthusian, I came back to New York to act as a parish priest. That's actually 20 years ago now, this spring. So time, I want to keep putting, I'm asking what am I going to do when I'm 90, maybe some other project. I've been acting as a parish priest in the Archdiocese of New York, in Manhattan and Brooklyn, Manhattan and Bronx. And currently it's Notre Dame, which is the church by Columbia University, which is also Église Notre Dame, the French church for the French Apostolate of New York. So since I lived in France, now I'm reaping the benefits of that by being involved in the French-speaking apostolate in New York. So I have a lot of background with contemplative life, obviously. I'm also a Zen teacher in the Zen tradition through my longtime friend and mentor, Jesuit Father Robert E. Kennedy, Roshi. So I became, through him, a Zen teacher 5 years ago. I've done a lot of yoga, meditation, yoga study with the master from the Philippines. I've studied Kabbalah and all that stuff we're doing today. You'll see how it all fits together. But that's for a few minutes from now. So let's get started with a centering prayer to get us at that level of depth and attentiveness, which we should have all the time. So exactly 1 year ago, we had our first meeting here, and Judy began, my trustee of our parish and my friend and assistant, began filming and videoing my presentations. So if you want a refresher on last year, just go online. It's on YouTube, our session last year, and it will be again this year. Someone has already been asking about that. In fact, Judy's been helping me launch a website, so that should be up in the next week or so, and get links to all the stuff. You can also see, this is kind of a version of the talk I gave in Fort Collins in January, over 2 nights, this past January. So you can compare versions, or maybe get them. So they never give the same talk, as if you could. Every moment is different, and the audience is different. If anyone has any problem, having your questions or comments recorded, I mean, they won't focus on your face or anything, but just let us know and we can edit it out. But we hope you'll participate. Now, those of you who were here last year may be saying, well, I really didn't get it, and I hope that this year I'll get it. Probably not. It's not going to be any easier. But this is the way I look at it. This is really difficult material. It's very profound. It's not something I made up. I discovered it over decades of spiritual search, usually in various specialized circumstances like monasteries and retreat centers, etc. So, and studied prayer But I think it's really important, and some of my teachers think it's really important to get this stuff out there now, because this is global integrated spirituality, which holds some of the key not only for the deepening our own spiritual lives, but for coming together as a planet, deepening our experience and appreciating other approaches. So remember last year we looked at the Eastern Orthodox Church, our own Christian tradition from an Eastern point of view. We looked at the Kabbalah, a little introduction to that. Then in the afternoon we saw a meditation using the chakras, what we call the twin hearts, and then from the kind of yoga tradition, and then also some Zen. We did some Zen. So what I'll be doing today is I'll be kind of unifying, seeing how these traditions can work together and kind of be presented in a single focus, which I'll show you, and also seeing it from the point of view of consciousness, as you see the types and levels of consciousness that we have. So, in seeing how all these can be synthesized, and kind of what the progress of the spiritual life is, or the progress of the growth of consciousness and the transformation of consciousness, which I think is the goal of all religion and spirituality, not to distinguish them on this level. They're all for the transformation of consciousness, and ultimately for union with the divine, or however you envision that, which is the same thing, as we'll see, I hope. And as has been pointed out, religion without mysticism, which is what we're talking about here, transformation of consciousness, is in and through mysticism, which is this union, experience of unity, and immediate connection. Religion without mysticism is ideology. It's just a system of rules and beliefs of whatever tradition, of which are impervious to experience or reason or evolution, and therefore ultimately destructive in their rigidity. Don't have to look very far, either in Christianity or Islam or elsewhere, even in Buddhism, to see how harmful and how true that is. So all the more reason to focus on the inner reality of these traditions, our own tradition included, and see how they can fit together. And one of the most intriguing things, and I'll give you a diagram about this that I recently revised, that I made a dozen years ago, showing the historical interconnectedness of various spiritual currents and how they influenced theology and thought and mysticism. I'll show that, I'll get that out as one of the handouts. But I'd just like to explain a few things to set the stage. Very often in the spiritual life, for example by the Carmelites and some of the ancients, is presented in a series of 3 steps. You kind of like the beginning, middle, and the end. But it's, for example, you may have heard it, the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way. In other words, you start by doing the necessary work to overcome your vices and start being luminous with the virtues. Then the luminosity, precisely the illuminative way, is where you begin to experience this connectedness and this growth and this expansiveness and this radiance, which is the bulk of the spiritual life generally, if you start soon enough. And then the unitive way, that transforming union, the mystical marriage, etc., that we speak about in our own tradition in those terms. We'll speak about all of that today. But what interested me at a certain point early on when I was a young Jesuit was I discovered that there were 4. There were 4 levels that kept popping up. And I say, where is that coming from? The way I came about it, as I recall, is this. St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of what they call the Cappadocian Fathers in the late 4th century, from our own Catholic tradition, or Christian tradition, before there was any division in the churches, and who's often called the father of mysticism. Not that he was the first to experience it, but he was the first to try and formulate it, and present it, intellectually. He called, for example, the feeling of presence, the sentiment of presence. That's the word he used for the mystical experience. I first found it in his thought, and Hanshos from Balthasar, Cardinal Jean d'Agneau, these are the scholars of the mid-20th century who presented this in modern times to us. But that's where I discovered it. So he has, a first level, but the second level, that illuminative way, seems to be divided into 2. Instead it was, big and long. And the second and the third, below the fourth, were what he called theoria physicae, which means contemplation of nature. So the natural world from a spiritual perspective. And then the third level, within that second level, if you will, he called theologia, or it would seem to be where the angels were, an angelic world, spiritual world in that sense, which is close to us, but on that level of spirituality. And then above that is the divine level, the divine union, so that unitive level. So I said, where did he get this division where you have like nature and the angelic world clearly distinguished on this level of spiritual life and of consciousness? And where I finally discovered where it got it is from the Kabbalah. And it wasn't called that. That's a medieval word, I believe. But it does go back to what's called Merkaba, or the chariot mysticism, which is the vision of Ezekiel 1. If you go back and see this mystical vision of these fiery chariots that St. John used in the book of Revelation. Four animals, remember that? With four faces, etc. And the different level of the world, the chariot itself, which is climbing into heaven, and then the throne, the mystical throne, with one sitting on the throne. There were like these four levels already distinguished there. And that came down, and you'll see this on the diagram, in various ways. The city of Alexandria in Egypt in the 1st century and even before, and then into the age of the fathers of the church, was a place of mystical philosophy and thought and experience, which used allegorical methods. In other words, seeing the symbolic, the content and power of symbol, like in nature, the contemplation of nature. Seeing the symbolic value and symbolic, within us. That Philo the Jew, is a Jewish philosopher in the Neoplatonic era, was a contemporary of Jesus, and he had a vast influence, not only on Jewish thought, but then on Christian thought as well. And he influenced Gregory of Nyssa, Origen in the previous century, some of the great fathers of the church, and that's where he got it. So down through the Jewish tradition, the Jewish mystical tradition, what we call now the Kabbalah. What you find in Origen in the 3rd century is a fourfold division already expressed in terms of Scripture. And by the way, I'm going to give you also a handout with these fourfold divisions, a long sheet of about 10 different examples of the fourfold division as it came down. I'll mention some of them as I did my speaking today. That's one of the divisions of the Scriptures. Literal sense, kind of like the bodily external sense, which everybody knows or doesn't know very well, misread it. But then this was central for hundreds and hundreds of years, all the way up to the 19th century. This was the way for Christians and Jews as well, the Jewish mystics, to interpret the Scriptures. On the second level, you have the level of symbol, the level of soul, the level of nature. You had what they call the allegorical sense of Scripture. What is the symbolic meaning, not only of the obvious symbols like the Red Sea and the desert, but even the details were interpreted allegorically and spiritually as having a deeper meaning that you could get into through the power of the Spirit. And the third level, kind of like corresponding to that angelic level, is what they call the moral or tropological level, which is the level of spiritual interpretation of the individual. So how it applies to your own inner life. Allegorical was like the life of the church, of the community, the symbolic actions of baptism, etc. And then became applied to the individual level, the spiritual level. And then the fourth level was called anagogical, how it was fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven. Now, let me give you an example. This is from the book by Cardinal Danielou, Jean Danielou, who died in 1974. You may not have heard of him, but he was a great Jesuit scholar and a cardinal. And he wrote a little book toward the end of his career called The Temple. And he said that Everything to do with religion and spirituality, everything that I ever wanted to say is right here. Which is a lot, because he was a great scholar and wrote many books, especially about the intertestamental period, the Judeo-Christian, around the same time as Philo, and a lot of exploration of angels and apocalypses and all of that, so that's how it came through. How so? Because every level of reality and consciousness can be expressed symbolically in terms of the temple. For example, the whole universe is the temple of God. Very environmental, very 21st century, very ecological, in the sense of the whole universe being alive with the presence of God. The whole universe being not only created by God, but being a house of God where you can encounter God. St. Bernard, for example, in the Middle Ages, had this very strong sense. He said this: the woods, nature is the first scripture, put it, because it's where you can read the presence of God and experience the presence of God. Many different ways of levels of, for example, communing with a tree and the various interconnected levels of consciousness and connection you can have with a tree. Try it sometime, if you dare. We'll come back to that. But the point is that nature, the world is already a temple. Then you have the temple in Jerusalem. You have the actual temple in the religious traditions, the churches, the cathedrals, which are themselves symbols, as I'll come back and say in a second. Then you have, of course, as what Paul says, we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. The third level of the individual, not just in nature, and that's the level of, we are the temple. And then, of course, Christ being the temple as well, and we're the body of Christ, etc. And then, finally, the temple of the New Jerusalem, the fulfillment of the kingdom of God, and that's also symbolic. So every level of interconnected reality, and that's the point, is they're all interconnected and can be expressed with the same symbols, is a temple and is a place where God dwells and where we can meet God. That's what temples are for. We meet God there in ourselves, in the universe, in Christ, in the church, in heaven, and they're all interconnected. What's especially good about this fourfold Kabbalistic presentation, as you'll see in the handout I'll give you, not now, it'll be a distraction right now, but during lunchtime you could look at it and be hypnotized and distracted and curious, so curious you'll be bubbling with questions by the time you come back, essentially, is that they really are kind of like interconnected, like a continuous chain of links. They overlap each other. And it's fascinating to see how that works, and you'll see how it works. But they're all interconnected. And this is called, also the Hermetic tradition. That is to say, a tradition of hidden mysticism, and hidden interconnection, where microcosm and macrocosm, the little world, us, and the big world, as you see, interconnected. They're both temples, and they both interact. Or to put it as the great, formula of this tradition says, as above, so below. As within, so without. Really important for consciousness, to unify consciousness, to realize if you want to reach a fullness of consciousness, a truly spiritual consciousness, everything is included. You don't separate your spirit out, or the mind, much less. The mind's not spiritual at all. If you've drilled well in your mind, you know that. You've got to get beyond that. So, it includes everything. It includes the body, it includes the soul, it includes the spirit, it includes the divine. There's the four levels again. Body, soul, spirit, and divinity. As we'll see, four levels of the consciousness and four levels that are directly interconnected in ourselves and beyond ourselves. Traditional four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Another way of looking at it, but again, four. Or the temple itself, within the temple in Jerusalem. The Kabbalistic authors, never mind the Kabbalistic authors as some kind of special set. The book of Exodus, the last 15 chapters, 25 to 40, are a detailed description of the building of the temple, or in that case, of the tent in the wilderness. It says, for 8 chapters or whatever, it says, these are the things they were asked to do according to the pattern shown them on the mountain, as it says also in the letter to the Hebrews, which is in one of the very allegorical, probably an author from Alexandria, not St. Paul. Anyway, so this is what you have to do, and then after it describes in detail what you're supposed to do, it says 8 more chapters that they did it in detail. Now, why would they spend 15 or 16 chapters on such detail unless there was some deeper meaning? And there is in the mystical tradition, which became precisely on the level of the temple. And in the temple itself, there were the outer court and the holy place and the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant, 4 levels. And it was given a cosmic interpretation and an inner level of nature and spirit. That's 2 and 3. So it was given a spiritual interpretation of applying to the individual, and then in connection to God. Then you go back to the Catholic tradition, you find, oh my, look at all these people. St. Ambrose is full of these allegorical interpretations, which he couldn't have gotten from anywhere else. The same 4th century as St. Gregory of Nyssa, but a different current. And then you also have, in the Middle Ages, the school of St. Victor. In France in the 12th century, you have mystical treatises on the temple and the Ark of the Covenant. And if you saw the recent movie with Russell Crowe about Noah, they even have treatises called The Mystical Ark of Noah and The Moral Ark of Noah. Different levels of spiritual interpretation of the story, which is a myth. It didn't happen. Thank God. But it always happens. It was already interpreted in the New Testament as being a symbol of this baptism, of the flooding and washing away of all the impurities, and then the rising to new life. That's what the whole imagery of baptism is about. Christ's passion and resurrection. We'll come back to that, obviously. It's the whole pattern of life and existence. So again, in these medieval mystics, you had a strong direct connection to the symbolic interpretation of the scriptures about the different levels of the spiritual life and different levels of consciousness. Came down all the way into Dante in the Divine Comedy. You have hell and purgatory, the purgatory, the soul. Then heaven, ascending the heavens in the spiritual world with the angels and all. And then the divine, above. There it is again. And that's a mystical treatise. It's not just about what happens after we die. It's about what happens hopefully before we die in our spiritual life. It's a mystical treatise on the spiritual life, the Divine Comedy, which it gets from St. Thomas and St. Bonaventure as well. Now, in our Western theological tradition, it was spoken of in terms of the chain of being. Mystical chain of being. All the levels of being are directly interconnected from God all the way down to a stone or a grain of dust. That's why Jesus says, if these were silent, even the stones would cry out. So try and commune with a stone sometime, and you'll find a level of consciousness there. Because it's all consciousness, as the tradition says, the Hermetic tradition. Divinity is just congealed into spirit, is congealed into energy, is congealed into matter. It's direct connection. Science itself says energy and matter are the same thing in different levels of congealing. So, as Einstein confirms the Kabbalah. And so there's a direct line of experience here. That's why I hate, as many scholars, including among these that I mentioned, the great Cardinal Henri de Lubac, who wrote a whole book on it, and Karl Rahner and François von Balthasar, they've written, we can't distinguish the natural and the supernatural in the end. Those are artificial concepts. All concepts are artificial in the end, but especially that, because it's destructive. There's kind of some say a supernatural world, and then there's a natural world. No. There's just a natural world. And at each level, each thing is natural. At God's level, God's naturally God. And the angels are naturally what they are, and nature is naturally what it is, and so are we. But there's a direct line of connection. The Holy Spirit fills the world, as we say on Pentecost. So this notion that we have to somehow get away from this dark, ugly world down here of matter, and somehow go up to the spiritual world, which is the supernatural, is very, very, very wrong and very harmful. Now there are different levels. There are, journeys we have to go through, and purifications, the purgative way that we have to go, and illuminations that we have to go through. But there's a connection between all these. It's not something that's totally foreign. Everything is connected. So this also came down in the alchemical tradition, and, etc., and and other ways we'll see in just a second. So what I want to do, especially this morning, is just focus on those. Well, the base one, the bottom one, the literal sense, the bodily sense, is just our physical selves as we are. And as I say, we can commune with nature and find more there than we expect. It's not just dead matter, as the way many people treat it, exploiting it, and not having any sense of its inner beauty and aliveness. But I want to especially focus this morning then on that second level, the level of soul, the element of water, the element then of passion, that level where spirit and body meet. And the mystical level we call soul. That's why we speak about soul work. This is the level we have to do our soul work, the level of the psychic level, the level of where we have psychotherapy works there, art works there, for example, and all these are ways of certainly encountering God. There's a level of passion, level of all these energies within ourselves. The passions, as the medieval theologians spoke about them. But seeing them not just come to some kind of terrifying or even worse, bad realities, but potential, energy, power, beauty, that just needs to be realigned. We speak about the fall and all that. It needs to be purged and realigned and harmonized and integrated and transformed. And that's the journey of the spiritual life on this second level of soul, of how we can reintegrate our soul, our level of work, our level of different levels of ourselves. And it's a spiritual journey. And I have found, and this goes back to what I was talking about last year, that it's precisely the Kabbalistic tradition, when combined with, and this is what my yoga teacher did so brilliantly, and I'll give you the bibliography, but combined with the chakra system. Now, we've spoken about this, but how many of you have heard of the chakras before? A good number of you. It's just energy centers in the body, which the Hindus discovered. They didn't invent them. Please, this is not specifically Hindu. They discovered them. And the fact that they can be mirrored so well from an entirely different tradition, the Sephiroth of the Kabbalah, energy centers throughout the whole universe, duplicated and intertwined, as you'll see, shows that there's something just natural here. This is the way things are. So I get really upset when people say, well, don't talk about the chakras, that's Hindu and that's anti-Christian. Well, yoga's not, simply what's natural. Calling the chakras, anti-Christian or non-Christian anti-Christian is like saying eating and sleeping are not anti-Christian. It's just natural. It's just what is. Which, let's be honest, the East has explored and discovered better than we have in the West. The West, we were a little too content with our categories of spirit, matter, body and soul together. The Greek, Aristotle, Platonic concepts of kind of like the war between the body and spirit, which Augustine didn't do anything to help. Augustine only aggravated that war. So we have the notion that I have to have a clear intelligence, and by my clear, powerful will, of course aided by grace, and give lip service to that, I'm going to overcome my passions, which usually meant repress and deny my passions. And of course we made a complete mess out of that. If you have any experience of that asceticism that I got when I was a kid, or you often found in books, and how. That's why I think we have to go to the East and kind of rediscover what I call a new spiritual anthropology, which is really quite ancient. That's the whole point. It's not New Age, it's ancient wisdom. We didn't just invent it, we maybe just rediscovered it. But here, on the level of consciousness, you can actually access, with a good teacher, with a good instruction, the different energy, centers within you, When we did the meditation last year, the twin hearts, the crown and the heart, that was a one way of doing it, an introduction to it. You do need a teacher for this kind of thing, but it's good to know that this is there. And sometimes I speak about 7 chakras, but it's more likely 11. according to my teacher, or all sorts of minor energy centers all over the place. You know, palms of the hands, for example, which is why you have statues of Mary and Jesus with the energy of light coming out, white and red coming out from the hands. That's the chakra. The halos of the crown chakra. So you find that miters are actually to focus energy into the crown chakra. I don't know how well it works, but it's hard for all of us. But that's what the yarmulke is. That's what the yarmulke is. It's a way to focus energy on the crown. You know, even people who wear them probably don't know that. Many of them. But hopefully more and more they do. And you know, it's hard, obviously, for all of us, and maybe even especially spiritual leaders, you know, to travel this path with all the pressures. But it really is important, you know, and to be compassionate and patient with one another as we are with ourselves, as God is with us through this journey. And what's, you know, so very, very briefly, you know, the crown chakra is called the crown is called the crown in both. Isn't it interesting? Keter and crown, we call it the crown in both, you know, the chakra system and the Kabbalah. Then you have the, you know, the forehead and the upper forehead and the lower forehead, the Ajna chakra, which corresponds to the wisdom and understanding in the Hebrew system. Then you have the throat chakra called knowledge, da'af. Wisdom, understanding, knowledge. Sound familiar? Yeah, you can collate the gifts of the Holy Spirit, the 7 gifts of the Spirit, with the 7 major chakras in the same way. Then you have Dola and Gevura, or Chesed and Gevura, which is mercy and strength. In the Hebrew system, usually, you know, put on 2 sides of the person, the right and left arm, but in the chakra system, it's the heart and the solar plexus. Then, you know, the navel chakra, Tifereth, or beauty in Hebrew, which is where the divine energy kind of is stored and enters into the body, you know, in the lower. Then the two legs, or Hod and Netzach, which is glory and strength, the back, navel, and the spleen. The nature energy enters into the body from below. And then the sex chakra, the Yesod foundation, and the base chakra, often like where the Shekinah is, kingdom, called the kingdom. Now the interesting thing is that you know, exercises. These are also centers of consciousness, levels of consciousness. Commune with the interesting thing here, if you're talking about a process of growth, and a process of transformation of consciousness, is that it's, you know, from above, you know, as even the ancient philosophers said, from above, entering in, going all the way down, taking it up, and then taking it up, you know, all the way back up again. It's that's the rising of the Kundalini energy in the Hindu system. It's the death and resurrection in our Christian tradition, where you're going down into the depths. You're dying to your old self, you're getting buried down into the depths, and then you're rising again with a new life. And that's not different from this. It's transformation of the old, like the resurrected body. You know, we already can experience that in Christ, in its germ. And you know, so it's a dynamic process. And it's 11, so 11 down and 11 up. 22. Which is a number of letters in the Hebrew alphabet. I don't know if I remember spoke of this last year, but something the Jewish mystics strongly believe. You can find it in other traditions too, like Sanskrit and in Sanskrit chants in the Hindu tradition, and even somewhat in the Gregorian chant, you know, which I'll sing for you later as well. The power of the letter, the power of the word, you know, as being an embodiment of consciousness and a catalyst. What these archetypes, what these centers are, what these symbols are, you know, often they're symbols, and I'll come more to that in a second, are catalysts for experience. They help us enter into the experience that's possible there. So you can, for example, commune with the letter Aleph in the Hebrew alphabet. And I'm giving you a bibliography where there's a wonderful little book that gives you practical ways to commune with the energy centers, which are the Hebrew letters. And there's a progress to it, up and down, 11 to 22. As you say, by the word of God, the heavens were made. Let there be light, the word. The mystics point out, even a single letter. The very first letter, the Jewish mystics say, the very first letter of the book of Genesis contains everything. And it comes from the silence of God above, which is the first Hebrew letter, which is Aleph, which isn't A, well, the second one is Bey. The first letter is silent, because God is ultimate silence. We talked a little bit about this last year, I believe, to kind of give you a sense of how mystical these things are and how powerful they are. You can experience that for yourself. As I say, what I like about that little book on the Hebrew alphabet, it's called A Mystical Journey, is that there are simple exercises which you can do on your own and try out for yourself to give you a sense of this. What's also fascinating here, and here's where we rejoin the Hermetic tradition, even more closely, is that these 22 levels, archetypes, whatever you want to call them, energies, correspond to something else as well. Any idea what? 22. Oh, you're all such good Catholics. The tarot. What? He's mentioning the tarot? Yeah, actually, the tarot comes from the Kabbalah. And, most people seem to make, silly use of the tarot. They're just going to try and, predict the future and all that stuff. They not really know what they're doing. But the actual original meaning is each of the major arcana is an archetype, like the magician, the hermit, the tower, death, the star, moon, sun. Is a catalyst to an energy experience, and it corresponds to part of a level of that journey. So the 22 correspond not only to the letters of the alphabet, but to the arcana of the tarot. And I have also for you on the bibliography a book which has recently been reprinted and which I consider the most profound book I've ever read, which is probably saying something. And it's not easy. And each time I go back and reread it, which I have several times, I say, how did I ever miss this the first time around? Because it reveals itself to you as you read it, which is what St. Jerome and others said. Pope Gregory the Great said, this is what happens to the scriptures. You go back to the scriptures, and how did I ever miss this the first time? Well, because you weren't ready to hear it yet. So that's why you need to go through purification and greater openness, greater awareness as you go on in life. Except with the same text will speak to you differently. The same here. The book is called Meditations on the Tarot. It's called A Journey into Christian Hermeticism. I mentioned that word already, that hidden mystical tradition, kind of cross-cultural. So a journey into Christian Hermeticism. Okay? And this is the very ancient tradition that I've been talking about all morning. About you can see it back in the Middle Ages and in the fathers of the church, who use it, but they don't give their source away. Why don't they give their source away? I don't know. Well, it depends how they got it. But my suspicion is because you couldn't really be pro-Jewish in those days. I don't know, maybe. Anyway, but that's where it came from. So Journey into Christian Hermeticism is what it is, and it has an afterword written by Cardinal Hans-Urs von Balthasar. It's an anonymous book. It was written by a Frenchman of Russian origin who was a practicing Catholic. It's all right, I'll give you the bibliography, but it's got this marvelous theologian who was one of the darlings, actually, of the conservatives during the 70s and 80s before he died, who was a former Jesuit, and a well-known mystic and writer. He was considered by Cardinal de Lubac to be the most cultivated man of the West. And here he's one of the ones I mentioned who wrote a book saying we don't really know, we can't really distinguish natural, supernatural very well, etc. He also one who believed, that we should revisit the idea of eternal hell, for example. Again, following the original fathers that he was reading and commenting on in his own mystical experience. But that's another issue, a related issue, but another issue. My point being that here you have about as Catholic a guy as you can get, who was named Cardinal by Pope John Paul II, who is signing off on a book on the tarot. That's pretty extraordinary. And you can actually see how much we've lost. We lost it around the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation, when the Church began to be really scared of mysticism. That's why the Carmelites, St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa had such a hard time. But anyway, if you go back and see, for example, the thing I often like to point out is if you go into Siena Cathedral, I think 15th century, whatever it is, just at the threshold of this new era, there's a mosaic in the entrance to Siena Cathedral to Hermes Trismegistus, the mystical or mythical almost founder of this Hermetic movement that I spoke about before, as above, so below, so spread, so without. There's a mosaic dedicated to him at the entryway to the Catholic Cathedral in Siena. Can you imagine that happening at St. Patrick's today? People would have no idea what this was about, and they'd say, what on earth? Because on it says, going back to the wisdom of ancient Egypt, which is where Moses and the Kabbalah were supposed to have gotten their original info from ancient Egypt. How scary would that be today? And yet, there it is. And I just blew my mind time and time again, about a dozen years ago when I first really discovered this, to see how this vast tradition, which goes all the way back to Jewish mysticism, came down through the great Catholic mystics and fathers of the church, and theologians of the Middle Ages, and spiritual writers of the Middle Ages, was just lost. We've never heard of it anymore. But it's all right there. And going back to this tradition will help us, to reintegrate and in a more healthy and effective way commune with different levels of consciousness in our own emotional composite here of our passions, our body, etc. Reintegrate all those dragon energies, or whatever you want to call them, Kundalini. Although instead of doing what we often do in the West, maybe following St. Augustine, instead of killing the dragon, St. George, killing the dragon, and the dragon being the devil is as if that was exactly the same thing. It can be problematic, but it's not evil. It's just untransformed. All that is created by God. Instead of killing the dragon, in the East, of course, in China and elsewhere, the dragon is a symbol of good luck and integration and joy. Earth, air, fire, and water all integrated. The dragon, which is made of earth and flies through the air, and it's a sea serpent, and breathes fire. Symbol of integration, of wisdom and enlightenment. Because all that stuff has been reintegrated and realigned. And that's what's so important about it, to see that all that can be harmonized and work together. Now and for Jung spoke about it in terms of the heroic journey, heroic night sea journey. There's the sea again, that flood, dark night sea journey. The hero, all of us, we're in Joseph Campbell territory here. You have to go through this journey and come out the other side. It's like night, and day again. What is that? Well, crucifixion, entombment, and resurrection. It's that journey. And again, it's that dynamic journey, down and then up again. The way in, out, up above, also the way down is the way up. Richard Rohr's spirituality, that's a major theme of his. The way down is the way up. To go through that process. Which brings me to this wonderful book, which I saw on Richard Rohr's coffee table once. Tarot and the Journey of the Hero. Exactly. So it takes the tarot on the journey of the hero in this dynamic way, based using Jung's philosophy, psychology, which is very luminous about entering this shadow self, beyond the persona, getting beyond the ego to the true self, capital S, if you know anything about him, all that stuff is fantastic. It's, as many have said, it's the most compatible, with religious spirituality of any of the psychological systems. And using great, as you know, great use of archetype and then the common unconscious, that we all share, talking about making the unconscious conscious is what one Trappist abbot said is the goal of the spiritual life. And that's true. On the second level here that we're talking about, the level of soul and passion, of water, exactly, the element of water and flood and all of this, and the spirit flowing out, that's what we're called to do, to integrate that energy. So it goes through all the different levels, the different passing, from night into day, and taking that journey. It's also the alchemical journey. Then also, alchemy was a powerful thing, well into the Renaissance, as you know. Even the theologians like St. Thomas wrote about this kind of thing because it's symbolic of the spiritual life. The different symbols, the symbols of the different elements, the different metals, for example, being transformed into gold. It was all about transforming our different elements in us into the gold of spiritual wisdom and enlightenment. That's what it's all about. And the Holy Grail, Dan Brown notwithstanding, is not Mary Magdalene, it's Mary Magdalene and all the rest of us, all of us, who are called to have, this is the level of the heart, remember, have our heart transformed into a chalice in which the blood of deep spirituality can be poured. The blood of Christ. That can intoxicate us, to use the beautiful phrase from the Anima Christi of St. Ignatius of Loyola. The intoxicating love and life of God poured into our hearts once we have our heart like a gold chalice ready to receive it. The Holy Grail is not some external chalice. The Holy Grail is our heart. So the great mystical journey, the heroic journey, King Arthur and all of that is all about this. All about coming back to our heart and realizing it's the Holy Grail. Going on a search for the Grail means going on a search for our true heart, our true self, beyond the ego and beyond all the stuff that gets in the way. And there's lots of stuff that gets in the way, as you know. That's why you need, the sacraments, why you need prayer, why you need psychotherapy, why you need all this journey, to realign all of this stuff. I spoke about art earlier. Some of the greatest artistic, I spoke about Dante already, but some of the greatest artistic epochs had to do with this. The Ring. Both of them. The Lord of the Rings and the Ring trilogy or tetralogy of Wagner, who also has something about Parsifal and the Holy Grail, right? It's about this. The great journey and the temptations of power and all these things that can distract you. Very symbolic, the whole thing, Brunhilde and all these are symbols, archetypes, again, of what we all are. And so those things can be powerful reminders, maybe even catalysts. My only problem with aesthetics is that it can sometimes just remain on this level of aesthetics consciousness and not get transformed into mystical consciousness, and they're not the same thing, right? They're not. One can be a doorway, the aesthetic can be a doorway, but too often people get stuck there because, why? Because the thing is bad? No, because they haven't done their soul work. So it gets caught up in all sorts of other stuff, or misaligned, or buried, or overpowered by other stuff that's going on inside. All the complexes and fears and obsessive compulsive and all the stuff we have to face. A good Freudian analysis would be good for everybody to help deal with all this stuff. So that's sublime art that really reaches, I mean, like Bach and other, you know, it has, I think, a powerful integrative potential, you know, to uplift, you know, organ music and Gregorian chant and things like that, as the church has always said, and other types of chant as well. But sometimes I feel when I listen to like rap music, or hip-hop, you know, I wonder, isn't this just the howling of the unintegrated, fearful, greedy self, frightened self, howling to itself, or to some other frightened, greedy self. It doesn't go anywhere. Maybe I'm too harsh. Maybe it does go somewhere. It depends where people are. I mean, everything has potential, I suppose. But sometimes I feel that it's just kind of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, and the Titanic's going down. Instead of being truly transformative. And talking about consciousness, you know, the passions and the things. Medieval theologians were right when they talk about habits and forming habits, going back to Aristotle already, that, you know, you build up, you know, attitudes, and they get rooted in you, you know, anger, fear, desire, you know, all the 7 deadly sins, if you like. And that's, as my yoga teacher says, they're actually, you know, living realities. They can take you over. That's what being possessed means. It's not some devil from outside who comes into it. No, it's your stuff that's taking you over. And it can take you over, as you know. Eckhart Tolle speaks of the pain body that feeds on itself, you know, feeds on its own pain and spreads pain and gets the same frequency of energy from outside and pulls it in and spreads it out. This is really dangerous stuff and very powerful. It's where the mob mentality comes, where group think comes from, which can so invade religion as well as politics. It's really, really dangerous. These are powerful spiritual forces. Talking about consciousness. You know, that can be your consciousness if you don't watch out. Where you're just, you know, mouthing the same falsehoods and nonsense because everybody else is. So when I speak about transformation of consciousness, it's not just, oh, wouldn't that be nice? It's, are you going to go down? Are you going to survive? Is the planet going to survive? Is our world going to survive? If we don't have a transformation of consciousness on all these levels, individually and as a group, and of the various groups coming together, as we see in these traditions which come together, you know, it's going to pull us apart. There's so many forces out there. So be careful what type of consciousness you align yourself with, because to use these wonderful tools that I've been speaking about as a way to navigate the process, navigate the night sea journey of the hero or the heroine. It's really necessary and very beautiful and important. Because that dragon energy and all those other sea monsters and stuff that are down there are down there. They come from a couple billion years of evolution on this planet, as well as being all created by God. That's the point. Created by God, and therefore they can be transformed by God into what? Well, on this level, we're talking about the Sacred Heart. Catholic piety comes back. We're talking about transformation of our own heart into the Holy Grail, the blood of Christ. This is the Sacred Heart, or the Immaculate Heart of Mary. If you want something as very simple and traditional and pious as that, this is what it really means. To have a heart in the dimension of Christ himself, in whom all these energies were, in fact, integrated from the start, and then especially through his own process of death and resurrection, which he connected to the pain and the energy of everybody, and transformed that. That's what we call the redemption. That's what we call salvation. Who knew that's what we meant? Very few. But that is what we mean. It's about that transformation of people, consciousness. So he didn't do it for us. Instead of us. He does it with us. You know. That's why he said, follow me. He didn't say, worship me because I did it for you. He's saying, follow me because I'm doing it with you and in you. Something Richard Rohr has pointed out very well in those terms. So that's the kind of dynamic that we're faced with here, and that is really, really important. So I've outlined, a couple of the ways and how all these various traditions come together. And spoken about art, etc. So I think that's all I wanted to say about that second level right now. Maybe more will come as we talk. But I would like to leave lots of time for, before lunch for questions and comments. Because this stuff is very heavy and probably very new to you. And so, anybody? Yes.
You talked about dragons. Because,
Yeah.
Now, background, dragons supposed to be an evil force. It says in Revelation that it's a bad thing, basically. But you
It says
said
what?
bad thing. Bad.
Oh, bad.
Dragon, yeah. He's the, so to speak, influence the world to sin. But you spoke about that in Eastern culture, that's not bad. Well, yeah, it's true. In Eastern culture, they worship that and they think it's a good law. I can't make the connection. Can you?
It's a different use of the symbol. So you're right. The Book of Revelation speaks about the ancient dragon, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
which is a symbol of this unintegrated, powerful, dangerous energy that I was just talking about a minute ago.
Yeah.
So that's the way they use the symbol. But we have to realize, and I think this is where the East helps us to see the fuller picture. You can use the same imagery. You can use the same symbol to symbolize, the completion and the integration and the harmony and the enlightenment that it can indicate. What's useful about it is that we realize that very same energy doesn't just get thrown down into hell. I mean, this is all created by God. This is all powerful stuff that's part of us. That's why Joseph Campbell says when you go into the depths of the cave, you think you're going to find a monster, and instead you find a God. Which is, in other words, this powerful being that's a reflection and image of God, which is you. So that's the usefulness of it. To be able to redeem, very Christian, redeem the symbol itself, to be able to speak in a different way. Now, the Book of Revelation, you have that use of the symbol, and we take it as face value for what it's trying to say. And it's true. But there are other ways supplementary ways we can see it. And we'll even talk more about, the symbol of the snake, on the tree in Genesis, is that serpent is this very thing we're talking about. This energy which can lead to sin, but which is also has to be reintegrated. That's why Jesus himself compares himself to a serpent on a tree in the Gospel of John, referring back to the book of Numbers, where Moses raised a serpent on the pole,
Yes.
and those who looked upon it, all the fathers take that as a symbol of Christ on the cross. So Jesus is the snake. His humanity redeems the snake. All right? It's not just the devil who's the snake. The snake can be a devil. That is to say, something gets in the way. That's what the word means. It can trip you up. But ultimately, it's supposed to be reintegrated. So Jesus is a snake as well. Jesus is a dragon. I'm a dragon. My name as a Zen teacher is Koryu, which means dragon of light. So I'm a dragon. And I don't feel evil, at least not all the time. So we're trying to see a broad picture here. And by the way, that reminds me, if we're talking about the purgative way, this is the Purgatorio of Dante. And you remember the 7-story mountain that you climb up, which is beyond the 7 deadly sins, purifying all these energies. That's where Thomas Merton gets his title of his autobiography, The 7-Story Mountain. He's talking about the Mount of Purgatory in Dante's comedy, Divine Comedy. And what's at the very top? Adam and Eve reintegrated. We're back to paradise. So when you do all of this and get enlightened and purified, you're almost returning to the paradisiac state before the fall. That's the message, which the mystics and the fathers and Dante are trying to tell us. There's a further stage of mounting to the divine, but at least on that level, you're kind of reintegrated. You've overcome all the alienation of fall and returned to a state of return to paradise. That's what the monks said their monasteries were, a cloistered paradise. Not so much. But it can be and should be, or the whole world, the temple, all the world should be a paradise. Your home should be a paradise. your heart should be a paradise, where as St. Bruno says, the founder of my order, the fruits of the tree of life can flourish and bloom, because the trees can heal, well fertilized, watered by the Spirit. And all these, symbols, all these powerful archetypes in the scriptures. Yes. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
How does addiction fit into all of this?
Well, that's a good point. One way is that part of well, there are lots of things I can say. One person has pointed out, I think Richard Rohr points this out, that some addictions can be a way for the body to recompensate. If it's being neglected, like addictions to food or such like, to reestablish, trying to reestablish a balance. Some say that addiction is a way of fleeing from suffering. You don't want to face the stuff you have to face, and so you're trying, get on a high somewhere else and you float out, beyond, space out. I think there's a lot of truth to that. In other words, addiction can be a substitute for doing your soul work. But I think most profoundly, and this is something that I've heard within my own family, most profoundly is that we're called to ecstasy. We're called to a higher consciousness. And that's a quick way to get it. At least it seems that this, look about drugs or alcohol, maybe even sex, etc. Anything that or high that you get from shopping or whatever, is a way to feel like really expansive, with its constant thought and such. Or beyond your fears, as I say, running away from your fears. It's kind of a way to get intoxicated. And my point is, and this is what the mystics say too, we're all called to intoxication. We're called by our very nature to ecstasy. We're all called to be expanded beyond our little selves. The problem is, you can take the easy way,
Yeah.
which is going to bite you in the ass, after, because, for lots of reasons. It's illegal, you fry your brain, you mess up your life, so it's not a very helpful way, but the instinct is a good one, to be able to achieve that. We sang a hymn every night in the monastery by St. Ambrose, the very person I mentioned earlier as being, really plugged into the symbolism in the scriptures, from Philo, which said, today, let faith be our food, let's see. Be our food and drink, and that let us be intoxicated with the sober inebriation of the Spirit, which is a great phrase. Sobriam ebrietatem spirit, with the sober inebriation of the Spirit. So we're called to be inebriated, but it's a sober kind of inebriation, which is an expanded consciousness. It doesn't drown us out and get into fog. It makes things an ecstasy which is even brighter and more luminous, to speak about the illuminative way. So that's what we're called to. Or, to go back to that phrase from St. Ignatius, let the blood of Christ inebriate me. That's what it says. It's a pretty powerful word. And it's pointing to a powerful experience. So I think that's the most benevolent interpretation of addiction, that it's simply a misguided attempt to reach the ecstasy and the intoxication to which we are all called. So the instinct is a good one. All the more reason to be compassionate towards those who trying to run away from their soul work and take the shortcut, usually without even knowing that's what they're doing, and then helping them see another path that will bring an even better result. Yes?
On the same topic, where does genetics come in here?
That's a good one.
Because I have a genetic strain in my husband's family that is so strong that the normal, everybody, those that want to be healed, doesn't seem to work.
Talking about addiction?
Addiction.
Yes.
And I see it so strongly right through.
Yeah.
Does it play a part?
Of course.
Just harder.
Yeah, it does play a part. And I know I'm not an authority on this, but I know that a genetic, if he has a disposition to alcoholism, etc., it's going to come through. Nature, nurture, I think there certainly is a nature part there as well. What that means spiritually is, talk about the way down is the way up. As Richard Rohr often points out that addiction and failure and suffering are the primary way to grow. But if everything is sweetness and light, you wind up, the ego will wind up kind of taking possession of it and thinking that it's all its own doing. Whereas, as Jesus' cross, we keep talking about carrying our cross and suffering with Christ. This is what it means. This means doing your soul work and facing the sufferings of life, external and internal, and familial and every other way, and working for that transformation through psychotherapy, through rehab, through sacraments, through prayer, through community, through whatever means is required. So it's an extra challenge. Take stock, face yourself. What do I have within me, including my genes, maybe especially my genes, and given that propensity and history, what do I need to do me to help myself and my family and others, to grow, to integrate all of this. And it can be really tough, but that's what the cross means. Jesus took the worst possible, in a sense, the worst possible human experience of being unjustly executed in the most gory and horrible way possible to show that there's no suffering too great, no suffering that's beyond the pale of being integrated into a dynamic of death and resurrection. The resurrection can follow on all of these things. So that's where, again, he's doing it with our humanity, not instead of. And he's doing it very much not only as Son of God, but as Son of Man. That's the whole point of the incarnation. He's taking on precisely all the density and obfuscation, all the opacity of our human nature, and having it transformed in himself through his very being, and then, as I say, through the dynamic of his passion and resurrection. And he's doing it with us because we are his body, we are his people, his bride, he's the head of the church, etc. All of that, which we'll speak about more this afternoon in terms of consciousness realization. But it's on this level that we're talking about. He shows us the way. And of course his teachings, not just his life and death, but his teachings show us the way as well. If you want to overcome all your anger and bitterness and frustration, forgive. Learn the path of forgiveness. Learn the path of love. Learn the path of nonviolence. Love your enemies. This is the secret, which we have never followed. Tell me any time in history where we were, as a church or as a nation, we've taken that seriously. I mean, really? No possibility of that. What comes through is Jesus says, beware of money, beware of power, beware of and beware of that. So money and power are the two things. You shall not be like this among you. You shouldn't be lording it over one another. How dangerous it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Easier for the camel to enter the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So we get caught in all these passions and false issues of money, fame, pleasure, all these things that the ego used to prop itself up and to make it think it exists. Whereas, of course, the ego as separate is an illusion. It's a good Buddhist insight, which we should have more of in the West. The ego as separate is an illusion. So insofar as we're limited to our separate sense of consciousness, our ego in the Jungian sense, or even the Freudian sense, that's a very low level of consciousness. Part of this level of soul that we're talking about is to begin the transformation out of the separate ego into reintegration with nature and with our body, which are obviously connected, with the universe, the temple of nature, the temple of our own body, and begin the process of transformation not only of our being, but of our consciousness, which in the end are the same. Just as they are in God, our being and consciousness are the same. Any more, yes?
What would you recommend for, like I was listening to all these traditions that you're talking about, and a lot of it is somewhat familiar to me, but not really.
Yeah.
Is there something you recommend to integrate the traditions that want to help me, let's say, on my spiritual path? Do I just live and allow whatever happens to happen, or is there, like, do I have to read books? Like, is that important? Is there like a consciousness for dummies, you know what I mean?
That's a good one. Maybe I should write that.
I think I would buy that one, yeah. I'm kind of like lost, but I would like to integrate some things, but I don't know what.
Well, that's why I have a bibliography I'm going to give out to you, some of the books I mentioned.
So read, like you recommend reading? and
Yeah, above
persevere,
all,
maybe-
two things above all. Wait for your inner impulse as you begin to listen to your own heart
Yes.
in prayer and elsewhere, maybe counseling, whatever. What are you drawn to? Are you drawn to explore Tibetan Buddhism? Are you drawn to explore the Catholic contemplative tradition, as most people do, sanctuary prayer here? What are you drawn to? And follow that. And then, so listen to what your own path is. Don't just read indiscriminately. Or you can try reading books and see what speaks to you. That's another way of doing it. And follow what does speak to you right here and now. And the other thing is, if you can, it's not easy, but if you can, find a spiritual director or someone who can help you, who's been further along on this path or these paths, who can help direct you in terms of the actual
How do you do
growth.
that with all of these traditions? You know, someone who's old for that.
Yeah, it's not easy. You can find it. You can find it in. If you look, you can find teachers. You know, teachers of Zen meditation, for example, lots of those Tibetan. Teachers of Christian contemplation, where you can read there. You can read books. Read Richard Rohr. Read Robert Rolheiser. Read Thomas Keating. Lots of stuff. You can launch yourself along the path that way. And by the way, since I mentioned Tibetan Buddhism, I'm glad you reminded me of that. I do want to point out that, and I discovered this really for myself only in the past year or two, that the bodhisattvas, what they call the Dhyani Buddhas, the symbols of certain levels of consciousness, are really, really powerful stuff. I think they're kind of like angelic forces, but in any case, they're powerful symbols which the Tibetans use. They precisely, not precisely meditate on, but in the sense of try to identify with, incorporate the energy, or allow themselves to be incorporated into the energy that these forces represent. They're very real. My point being here that I think they very well correspond, and they do, that's the way they're presented, corresponding to various chakras. The 5 Dhyani Buddhas, from the crown, all the way down to the navel chakra, in particular, are energy centers. If they can be personalized, you see, in that way, that's why it's useful. It's very interesting. You can have like a personal representation of those things. They correlated with the directions, with the 4 elements, with the colors, with the chakras, etc. And I found it to be very, very powerful and beautiful. Even though it's not Zen, it's not Christianity, but I have been able to learn more about that and practice it, because once you're at a certain level here, I mean, you can quickly plug into other traditions that are on the same level, dealing with the same thing, which is very fascinating to discover that, because you're resonating already on that same wavelength, and so you can plug into these things. Because I found that I think more of those Americans who are interested in Buddhism slightly more interested in Tibetan than they are in Zen, probably because they were Catholic or Jewish or whatever. In that kind of style of prayer, is very appeals to them more immediately. But anyway, be that as it may. Any other?
One other thing, suppose I come up against resistance to these things.
Suppose?
Well, I mean,
Are you talking about internal or external?
well, both.
Oh,
You know
right.
what I mean? Suppose it's like, it's like my son is getting involved in some of this stuff, and he's giving me some books to read, and I'm like,
Like what stuff, for example, if
well,
you
one
want
was
to
the
say?
Kundalini energy.
Oh, yeah,
Right,
okay.
so I've been reading about that, about a person's experience of that. So I'm just kind of reading it, but I'm not getting the sense, like, I'm seeing it as somebody else's experience.
Yes.
Maybe that's just the beginning.
Yeah, of
You know what I
course.
mean? But some of it is like, maybe, it's just so foreign to me.
Yeah.
I'm almost scared.
Yeah, of course.
I gotta say, so
That's-
if you come against that resistance, is there anything?
Well,
I can do?
wait a minute. There's resistance and there's caution.
Okay,
All
all
right?
right, good.
Caution is good
Yes.
in the sense that you can't be messing around with this stuff, and especially with Kundalini. You absolutely have to have a teacher for that, to guide you through that, and I hope your son does.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you get what's called, what my yoga teacher and others call the Kundalini syndrome, where, you know, you're getting insomnia and all sorts of stuff that don't, you know, all imbalanced because you're not integrating the energy right. You're unleashing too much too soon, and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So you have to be
Caution,
careful.
okay.
There's a famous author on Kundalini energy. You've some good books. What's his name? Gupta. I think that's the name. He's done a lot of research in the 20th century on all this. So there's some good stuff out there. But as regards resistance, you know, of course you're going to encounter a lot of resistance as you do in psychotherapy, certainly in the mystical life you do, which is the ego refusing to die, whether it's, you know, fear or, you know, just, well, yeah, fear basically of losing everything, but that's what Jesus said. Jesus said, whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses her life will save it. And that's what he was talking about. Lose your little self, the ego, and here Richard Rohr speaks a lot about this too, your true and false self. Lose your little self, your ego, to find your true self, the Christ self, Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it, which is the self with the capital S in the Jungian terms, the risen self, the true self. There is a process, as I've said, of death and resurrection here. So the ego doesn't want to die. So of course it's going to be a resistance. So the less and less you can identify with your ego, which happens as the more deeply you pray in any tradition, whether centering prayer or Zen or whatever, the more you do that, the less you'll identify with your thoughts and with who you thought you were, your persona in Jungian terms, or your ego, and the more you'll be free to, as you experience it, as you experience this transformation of consciousness, it's actually something vital and real for you. It'll become progressively easier to let go of the false self, let go of the scaffolding, let go of the resistance. But I think that's an important point. It's not, we can't do that a priori. We can't say, I'm not going to resist anymore, because you will. It has to be the experience that sets you free. The actual experience of the next stage says, oh wow, I'm so much more than I thought I was, which is one of the levels Richard Rohr speaks about. I'm so much more than I thought. I'm not just my history or my plans or my memories or my thoughts or my feelings or any of that. I'm, well, we call a child of God. I'm in the image of God. I'm divine in that sense. I'm the body of Christ. And we'll talk more about that transformation this afternoon, just how far that can go and what it means. But that's what will begin to let us, to free us, to liberate us.
So that's where I can see a teacher would be important then.
Yeah.
If they can kind of encourage or, whatever.
Exactly. And they can read where you are.
Yeah.
Again, as Richard says, you can only go as far, you can only lead somebody as far as you've gone yourself.
Right.
So that's why there aren't many spiritual directors around, because really, there aren't many people who, well, who knows? But there don't seem to be a lot of people who've done this very far, or even aware that it's there to be done, which is why I'm trying to present this. So that and you see, what I'm doing, I'm presenting the most ancient tradition, both Jewish and Christian. This is nothing New Age. This is nothing, psychobabble. This is not psychobabble. This is absolutely profound, thousands of years old stuff that I'm talking about. Yes.
For me, it all seems that you really just have to be open.
Yeah.
I mean, once you're open to hearing what's around and being allowed to follow that desire, it's fine. Things just keep happening.
You're not just open once and for all.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's about openness and receptivity. That's why the first beatitude is poverty of spirit, so that we can really be open and poor in the sense of being, we know we don't know anything. Beginner's mind, as the Zen people say. We're always beginners. We're all we have to be. But that's what we're always beginners. We always have to reopen. And I know from my personal history, and others I've helped. There are different doors and different resistances you encounter along the way. You thought you were open, they become even more open. Have your mind blown, as I said in the blog for this day. You have to have your mind blown and exploded, your heart exploded, your heart wounded, to use Jesus, in order to be open to union with everything, including people's pain. On this level, the Tibetans have a beautiful meditation called Tonglen, where you purposely and consciously take in the pain and the darkness of others into your own heart, which you're connected to anyway, it's all yours. And you metabolize it, you transform it, by the light and the love that you has now discovered in your own heart. Who did that? Somebody called Jesus? But when was the last time you heard the Jesus taking on the sins of the world presented in that perspective? Probably not, right? He just connected to it in his own human nature, not just his divine nature, but already in his human nature, he was already connected to all the pain. And because of who he was, as human and as divine, he was able to metabolize it and bring about the redemption of the world. That's what it means. As I said earlier, that's how it works. And so we can be more and more open to that too, to be able to, as we grow stronger. And in order to grow stronger, we can do that kind of exercise, that kind of selfless exercise of not just being content with our own little enlightenment, which of course, if it's genuine, is not separate. And therefore, we take others. Yes.
In my reading I've been doing, which is not just strictly Christian,
Yeah.
I keep coming across the process of reincarnation. Do you have any particular view on it?
I always try to avoid that issue. The deepest realization, something that the Zen Buddhists point out, is that when you truly awaken, no more karma, no more reincarnation. So that's true. People often compare that to purgatory, the Christian idea of purgatory after death. Some truth in that. How they articulate, in fact, I'm not sure. And of course, it's always misunderstood. It's not that I, as I am now in my understanding, leave my body and go as I am now into some other body. That's ridiculous. Nobody believes that. No Buddhist, no Hindu. Certainly no Buddhist does. So how you would understand it is, but if all energy is connected, and all consciousness is connected, well, who knows how all that works? Collective unconscious, all of that. So essentially, lots of different ways to approach it. It is true that the author of the Meditations on the Tarot, plugging into this Hermetic tradition, believes in that in some form or not. So, but certainly the Church has been, as he points out in the book, justly negative towards it because it's so misunderstood and so can be so misused, whatever the truth of it is. So in that sense, it's better, not to concentrate on it. And even as I say, even the Zen Buddhists say, it's not thinking about that stuff. Just try and wake up, to use their words, and be fully alive now, fully conscious now, and the rest will take care of itself. So that's, I think, the best approach. Yes.
Well, I had a question about how this applies to children and raising children.
Good point. Yes, good point.
I guess because I look at the demographics here,
Yeah, right.
and in order to bring about that vision of the world being transformed by transformed people, do we have to wait till we get to this stage in our life?
Yeah.
In the second half.
Very good point. And I don't have a full answer to that. That's one of the issues I'm always thinking about. I even asked Richard about it once. Because he speaks about the two halves of life. You have a book called Falling Upward, spiritual. And kids, all of us need in the first half of life, a structure, an ego, a sense of who I am as separate from everybody else, and what my talents are, what my place in the world is, what can I do. That's building up the ego in that Freudian sense is really essential. It's not optional, and you don't want to bypass that. The previous stages are never excluded or destroyed. They're included and transcended. Included like in the transcending. So then, what does it actually mean to be able to start guiding kids who need this basic container, as he puts it, of their ego, to train them in such a way that they have that, and yet. Are open to something more, that they don't get caught up in groupthink, or I'm a Catholic, or I'm American, or I'm male, or whatever it might be, so that they can, once they're called to reach their fullness, they can go beyond that. And that's tricky. That requires a real pedagogy. One thing I think that we should do, and I've done this with kids in the parishes I've served in, young kids, 6, 7, 8 years old, is to teach them how to do session prayer already. Teach them how to do some kind of inner meditation, meditation, whatever, some kind of prayer already. And they take to it like a fish to water, from my experience. They love it. You know, I used to say, well, imagine going down into the cave with your throat, your mind going down into your heart, and then sitting around a fire with Jesus, and what is Jesus saying to you? What do you say to Jesus? I tried that kind of thing. So there's lots of ways pedagogically you can do it, but I think it's really important to somehow acquire wisdom, listen to others' wisdom about training kids in such a way that they become fully functional adults, you know, in a psychological sense, a good sense of who they are, precisely they. But then, because of that, who they really are, and beyond that, to do it in such a way that they can be open and later. So teach them respect for other cultures, other types of people of different sexual orientations, people of different races. Teach them that from the very beginning. You can do that without destroying the sense of who, you know, what their own tradition is. That's one thing to do. Teach them the gospel of, you know, of loving their enemies, forgiving others, being kind, doing to unto others what you would have them do unto you, which we've never done, as I say, either. Teach them to do it and give them a good example. So moving in that direction from the start, as they do in the Buddhist, that's what inspired me when I visited Thailand and I saw they were teaching meditation to 5- and 6-year-olds. I said, well, we should do more of that, you know, in our own. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions before.
Just one.
Yeah.
I've had a spiritual directive for so many of my years, and you know, it's a personality thing
Yes,
too.
yes.
But you're drawn to someone who's open. I have been at the Senegal. Those nuns, that's their
Yeah.
you know thing is to
That's right.
do spiritual direction, and they're very open. They're into all the you know Eastern philosophies
Yeah.
and so forth, and they're open. Now my spiritual director, she's been a nun 81 years, a Dominican.
She was consecrated in the womb.
She
was, of course.
She's 98 years old. She is so open, and Barbara knows this. Providence would be here. You know, she's been to so many of our things. She's still going on. She's so open. And I think that's a big thing, the openness,
Yeah.
because you're always looking for new and better things. So I think God doesn't want us to be alone.
No, that's a great
He wants us to
inspiration.
be on our spiritual journey with someone.
I mean, some old people, as to use Richard Rohr's phrase, are old fools. I mean, they've never grown out of the ego. But someone who's been a nun for 81 years, I'm glad to see that it worked. Because that's what should happen. It should become more and more expansive, where you expand always beyond the... So much so that my Zen teacher, Roshi Bernie Glassman, a very famous American Zen Buddhist, say, well, maybe not talk about the destruction of the ego or something. It's called the expansion. The danger with that, though, is you think of ego inflation, megalomania. My ego is expanding. You're expanding beyond the ego is the point. So that's one thing to tell yourself. If you're afraid to go on the spiritual journey, losing yourself, remember that you're going to become what you really already are, but more and more aware of it, this wonderful divine being of light and life and joy. And you can begin to experience that gradually, step by step, as you go along.
And just to say something, she has a spiritual director.
Oh, very good.
And her one spiritual director moved on. She had to get another one,
Right.
and it's very important.
That's very good.
So to show, and she said, I'm still learning.
Yeah,
At 98, I'm still learning.
of course. Again, the father of mysticism, Gregory of Nyssa, that was his main spirituality, based on the Song of Songs. And the verse in Philippians 3 where it says, I don't think I've already attained it, but one thing I do, I stretch myself out to what lies ahead, to answer the upward call of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. So always stretching yourself out beyond where you are now. That was the whole basis of his mystical theology. Exactly what you're saying. He says, even in heaven, as Origen said, you'll still be moving and growing. Arise, my beloved, and come, which is said like 3 or 4, 6, 5 times in the Song of Songs, because we're always arising and always going beyond from where we are. That was his whole mystical theology right there. Yes?
What about the time element? How long does this take?
Forever.
Yeah, forever, right? But let's, even with a teacher and even, with goodwill, as one writer recently put it, a young American Zen priest. He said, no shortcuts. There aren't any, like drugs, there are no shortcuts. In other words, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time. Who knows? I mean, we speak about God's, it's all God's grace, of course, in our own terminology, which means it could happen anytime. Look at Eckhart Tolle, if you know his story, that he was, when he was 29 or whatever, he was in this deep depression. He was down in that low point, which is where resurrection starts. And he woke up the next morning and he saw everything. And the more he read after that, he realized, oh, this is what all the religions are talking about. And now he's a great teacher now. So it just came to him like that. I mean, it came at the nadir of his human. He was, practically suicidal. But it can just come like that. Probably in this case because he had a mission to preach to the world. In other words, it was a function of it was the universal function that he had, that he was given that. But in any case, it's a grace. In any case, it's a gift. Which anyone who travels this path at any length at all, it takes any steps along this path, quickly realizes it's a gift. It's way beyond the ego, because if it's the ego doing it, how can it all be overcome? So you're already beyond, you're swept off your feet from the very start. And even people who sometimes speak about self-power, they don't like the Japanese Buddhists speak about self-power instead of other power. But the self they're talking about there is also not just this ego self. It's from within is what they're saying, and from experience is what they're saying. But it's not their little ego that's doing it. I gave a talk on Christian contemplation in Japan to 200 non-Christian Japanese who were squatted in front of me there. And I made this point, and they agreed. That even from within their own tradition, it's experienced as something which is beyond you, and therefore, if you like, a gift that you can be grateful for. But normally it does take a long time. But what else better do you have to do? What else is life to become who we already are, and who we're called to be consciously, make the unconscious conscious, and the unconscious conscious from every direction. Yes.
But this sister, she was a sister.
Yeah.
So she didn't have family.
Now, okay, let's get this out of the way right away, since I was a monk and I'm still a priest and celibate and all this stuff. There's no privileged lifestyle. In fact, you can make a case that it's the people who have a family, who have to deal with the struggles of every day and human relationships, who have a head start. One of my favorite people is my fellow sensei in my Zen tradition, Ellen Burks, who just wrote a book called Selfless Love. She's a grandmother, she's a nurse, she's a nursing professor, she's a Zen teacher, and she's radiant now because she's married and she has a job and all these things. That's what taught her. That's where she was able to be transformed. And I always say contemplation, this takes place in the world. The world is the temple, the world is the monastery. And as I know from personal experience, my own and others around me, the monastery or the convent can actually be, and often is, a refuge from truth, a refuge from reality, a way to hide from yourself and from others, of never addressing these issues. That often happens. So none of this stuff about you have a very special place, by being in the monastery. The monastery can actually really get in your way and prevent and impede real growth. Whereas being in the world and dealing with a job and a family and little kids and everything can actually be a help. It's all in your consciousness, all how you approach it, all how you live it. As Jesus himself did, among the crowds. Anyone else? Do you have a story?
I'd just like to say something, Kathy. I think maybe most of us had the same experience. I know for myself, I was in my 30s, and I just came to the realization there had to be a lot more than this. And I was a wife and a mother, you had 4 kids, and it was like, oh no, there's got to be more than this. Be it. And I think that it's listening to the call.
Yes. That's
That's
what you were
what
saying
it is,
before,
listening.
just listening how you're led, whenever it comes,
Yeah.
and then following it. One more, then we'll have to go break.
Hi, I'm Annie. Thank you so much. I had a lot of identification with you. Speaking to a lot of things that were said today specifically about shortcuts, my experience in growing up in a Catholic, very Catholic family, I think the most damaging shortcut was that somehow, knowing that I was part of this, I had a soul too, not just love others, take care of others, that's what I learned. I think I missed something.
Yeah.
So my life experience has gone back to that known self to be true,
Yes.
which has been a very long road,
Yeah.
and is often, I think, criticized.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just how I believe it's
Well, it is. You're right.
received, but I just think if there was from a young age this idea that in fact, not only are we part of others, but the part of others that we are part of is essential and
Yes.
precious and
Yes.
needs to be explored and all that stuff. I think that's what was missing in my too.
Well, I agree, and I found in my own experience and others that to be absolutely true. Ellen, the woman I just mentioned, makes a point of that in her new book on selfless love. She says selfless love does not mean not taking care of your own needs and being aware of who you really are, because that's precisely what allows the spontaneity of God's love to work through you. Otherwise, it's just an ego trip again. I'm denying myself, I'm not thinking of myself, and meanwhile, you're so wrapped up in yourself. And that's what happened with a lot of religious people, nuns and others, and it wasn't their fault, that's just the way they were taught, the way you were taught, the way where I was taught. That somehow self-denial meant that you never thought of yourself, and that you tried to do things for others all the time. To put it differently, I often say this: we should not start by telling people, whether our kids or anybody else, when we present the Christian message, Christ died for your sins. Then lay a guilt shame trip on them and say, so, love him back. Yeah, right, I'm going to love that. No, you start by saying, you are beloved. You are a beloved child of God. You are a divine being of light, life, and joy, and peace, as I said before. And all you got to do is wake up to it. And we have tools here, sacraments, prayer, community. We can help you to do that. Interested? That's a little different, right? But instead we've misunderstood everything from the redemption to, prayer, and as I tried to say this morning. So we have to begin with what's positive, beginning in yourself. Where else is it going to start?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that the word shame.
Yeah.
It's all a sense of shame.
Yeah.
You can't be unified with things if you
Right.
feel separate by shame.
Exactly. We've laid a guilt and shame trip, especially about our body, about our sexuality, and it's done Augustine, the fruit of Augustine, and it's done a horrible, horrible disservice to people. We've tortured people and caused untold damage by that. And usually it's people just handing on what they themselves were told and what they suffered from themselves. So we can't even, we want to forgive that and have compassion on that. But there's no question that it's been a horrible tragedy in our anthropology, and in our practice, and that's what I'm trying to overcome. All right, so why don't we break?